Hello, namaste. Welcome back to Bhagavatam for Rationalists. My name is Kamalakar Kulukota, and in this episode, we are going to talk about Narasimha Avatar. So, when we last left them, the Danava king Hiranyakashipu was in a frustrated debate with his son Prahlada. His son was defiant and he was saying Vishnu is God when Hiranyakashipu wanted to convince him that he himself, Hiranyakashipu, was in fact God. So, Hiranyakashipu finally, at the end of the debate, asks him, ఎక్కడగలడు ఏ క్రియనే చక్కటి వర్తించునెట్టి జాడను వచ్చున్ చక్కడుదు నిన్ను విష్ణుని పెక్కులు ప్రేలెదవు వాని భృత్యుని బగిదెన్. Where is he? How does he behave and how does he move? I'll teach a lesson to you and him both. You talk like you are his servant rather than being my son. So Hiranyakashipu asks this. He thinks he's asking actually a rhetorical question, but then Prahlada responds in one of the most memorable poems. I think anyone who has familiarity with Telugu literature will know this two-liner poem. ఇందుగలడందు లేడని సందేహము వలదు చక్రి సర్వోపగతుండెందెందు వెదకి చూచిన నందందే గలడు దానవాగ్రణి వింటే. He's telling his father, "Oh, leader of Danavas, hear me. He's here, but not there. Maybe he's in the table, but not, on that chair. No need to doubt like that. Vishnu is everywhere. Wherever you search for him, you'll find him in all those places." So, important thing to think. And then the Vedaki Chunchi. You can't just say, "Oh, I have a stick in my hand. Is God in the stick?" and, just throw it away. You really have to think vedaki chuchina, search for it. So if you think about it, you think deeply about the nature of the stick in your hand and what it contains, you will in fact find God in that. All it needs is that sincerity, that way of looking at things, and you're going to find God everywhere. So then that's it. Hiranyakashipu is at his wit's end. So he wants to make it more concrete and he says, Dimbhaka sarvasthalamulanambhoruha netrudundu nanuchu migula samrambambuna balikeda stambambuna chupagalave chakrin gikrin. Foolish king, with great fervor you proclaim that Vishnu is everywhere. Can you show me that idiot god of yours in this pillar? If I broke this pillar up, will he be emerge from it? And of course, Prahlada responds saying, "Yeah, of course. Vishnu is everywhere. So why won't he be in this pillar that you're pointing to?" And Hiranyakashipu picks up his mace and hits on the pillar, which breaks up in two, and Narasimha comes out from it. This is a Narasimha temple in Ahobilam. And what you see is that Hiranyakashipu is surprised, taken aback when he took his mace and broke open the pillar, and from it emerged Narasimha. This is Vishnu in the form of a man with a lion's head. So that is why he's known as Narasimha. Nara means man, Simha means lion. So, and you see Prahlada also standing there with his hands folded and praying to the Lord. So, उग्रं वीरं महाविष्णुं ज्वलन्तं सर्वतोमुखं नृसिंहं भीषणं भद्रं मृत्योर्मृत्युर्नमाम्यहम्. To Vishnu, the angry, valiant, and great, to the fiery, the omnipresent, to Narasimha, who is fierce and auspicious, to the death of death itself, I bow, says Prahlada as Narasimha comes out of the pill. And then that's the end of Hiranyakashipu. Narasimha and Hiranyakashipu fight for several hours, and toward the end of the day, Hiranyakashipu is killed. Now, it is interesting to note that there is no violation of the boon that Brahma had given to Hiranyakashipu. For example, he asked that no man, animal, god, snake, and so on should be able to kill him. Well, you could argue Narasimha is neither man nor animal because he is a mixture of the two. He said, death cannot reach me in day or by night. And well, this was, they fought during the day and he was killed at twilight, which is neither day nor night. It's not inside or outside the house because it happens right on the threshold in the middle of the door where, he was to get into the house, not in the land or in the sky. He was given a boon. And this happens actually after fighting. Narasimha lays Hiranyakashipu down on his own lap, which is neither land nor sky, not by living or dead, not by astra weapons throw out and shastra weapons you do not throw out. Well, Narasimha uses his own nails, which you could argue is neither living nor dead, and it's neither an astra nor a shastra. Anyhow, without violating Brahma's boon, Narasimha killed Hiranyakashipu at that point. Narasimha is a major deity of Vaishnavism. He is more prominent than all the other avatars that we have described so far yesterday. There are many temples dedicated to him. We saw the one in Ahobilam. Ahobilam actually has a complex of temples, like 9 different temples in the same town that are dedicated with Narasimha as the major deity there. This is Narasimha from a 5th century temple in Ramtek. Now, Narasimha has a lion's face, which has an Ugra Swarupam or an angry face. But angry God is not to be feared. This story shows that simple devotion pacifies him, and that anger is not something that you need to be afraid of. Here is an example from Bangkok in Thailand. You see this boat that has Narasimha motif on its bow. And this was a common motif for warships in Thailand. Unfortunately, of course, nowadays ships are not made in this decorative way. They are just ugly steel behemoths. But in any event, this boat and many warships had Narasimha motif on their bow in Thailand. There was a famous 18th century naval commander in Thai history who's revered to this day as Nora Singh or as Narasimha. Another example from West. This is from Afghanistan, a deity of Narasimha. This was on loan and on exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And after the exhibit, it has been returned to the owners after the display. Um, let's get back to the story and conclude it. There was a large contingent in the army that was still devoted to Hiranyakashipu, and Narasimha defeats them all in war. Narasimha, as I said, looks angry and vengeful, but that wrath cools with simple devotion. So, Narasimha coronates Prahlada as the next king. Prahlada rules with justice over a large territory over a long period of time. We're going to see more from one or two descendants of Prahlada in future episodes. And the most important thing is that religious tolerance is restored. People are allowed to worship whomever and however they like to. Um, and Prahlada, that's how he has brought justice back to the world. संसारदावदहनाकरभीकरोरु ज्वालावलीभिरतिदग्धतनूरुहस्य तत्पादपद्मसरसीरुहमागतस्य लक्ष्मी नृसिंह मम देहि करावलम्बम्. All right. You might say this is mythological, hitting on a pillar and Narasimha coming out as a mix of man and beast, and then he kills a ruthless tyrant. How is this anything more than a story? How does it appeal to a rationalist like me? And I can tell you it does because of a number of messages. The first one that appeals to me is this message that fear of God is meaningless. Now, the world was afraid of Hiranyakashipu because he was very powerful, but that is fear of man. Fear of God is not fear of Hiranyakashipu. You're fearing something that could punish you, and that's rational. But fearing God, all you need is simple devotion, thinking through who is God and so forth. That's all you need, because that is all cools God's anger. So fear of God is meaningless. Now, that message really appeals to me as a rationalist. The second message that appeals to me is that when you don't have power, as Prahlada did not in this story, don't let others force their religion on you. You have to think for yourself. You have to think about who you believe is God and stay strong in that belief. And don't fall for propagandistic education just because your teachers tell you, or just because you read something in a book doesn't make it true. You have to think through it with your own mind and decide for yourself what is the real truth. Now, if that message doesn't appeal to a rationalist, I don't know what does, to use your own mind. Now, on the flip side of this message, I also see as Prahlada behaved after he became king. When you do have power, don't force your religion on others. Now, by power, I don't just mean like a king or like a government and so forth. We often are put in positions of power when, for example, if you're taking care of a child, or if you're a teacher that is teaching a number of children. I think when you have power, the most important thing you can do is encourage whoever you have power on to think for themselves. That, and turn them into rationalists. And that is what you can do when you have power. These are messages that are very appealing to me as a rationalist, that when you don't have power, you still think for yourself. And when you do have power, encourage others to actually think for themselves and make up their own mind. And no need to be fearful of God. Because as Prahlada prays to Narasimha, here is what he says. తపమున్ వంశము తేజమున్ శృతము సౌందర్యంబునుద్యోగమున్ నిపుణత్వంబు ప్రతాప పౌరుషములున్ నిష్ఠాబల ప్రజ్ఞలున్ జపహోమంబులు జాలవీశ్వర భవత్ సంతుష్టికై దంతియూధపు చందంబున భక్తి చేయవలయున్ తాత్పర్య సంయుక్తుడై. Look at that list that Prahlada gave. Penance, good lineage, Vedas, beauty, competence at one's job, valor, bravery, great strength, doing sacrifices, and all kinds of various pujas. These things are irrelevant to reaching you, O God. All one needs is devotion, like Gajendra and his fellow elephants. So Prahlada is rejecting all these things, including doing great sacrifices, doing great puja, having a good lineage, studying the Vedas, being competent at your job. None of these things is irrelevant. If you want to reach God, what you really need is just simple devotion, like Gajendra or the Elephant King and his fellow elephants. So that to me is a very appealing message, and Prahlada is enunciating it in front of Narasimha. Now, Narasimha is also a Kshipra avatar. He is there only for a brief period of time, and after having coronated, Prahlada goes back to heaven or to Vaikuntham, and Prahlada becomes king and rules with justice. Now, you might be a little confused by that last line, Dantiyudha Puchandambuna, like Gajendra and his fellow elephants. You might be wondering, who was that Gajendra? And that is also an important story of Bhagavatam. We are going to cover that in the next episode. And I have to tell you some very amazing and beautiful poetry in that episode of Bhagavatam. I really can't wait to share that with you. I hope to see you there. Thank you very much for your attention so far.